All right. Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. Welcome into the room. Welcome, and we're so glad that you're here. We're going to get ready to get started in a few minutes. And before we do that, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping for the folks entering. We see the room filling up, and this is good news for us. But we want to remind everyone of our commitment to maintaining a safe and accountable space. If you experience issues and need assistance, please reach out to me by sending me a direct message found at the top right corner of the event. To walk you through the tools of this session, I want to draw your attention to the vertical bar featuring several icons on the right side of your screen. If your event feed is open, it's going to be hiding your vertical bar. So please close your event feed by clicking on the X in the upper right corner of the event feed box. The event feed is like the chat box for the entire event rather than just this session. So once you've closed your event feed, you'll be able to see a vertical bar with several icons. You'll see speech squares. That's the chat box for this session. The Q&A icon, please use this to ask the presenters questions. And you may also vote for questions if you're very interested in hearing the answer to a question. Next, there's an icon of people indicating the participants in this session. Lastly, you'll see two papers stacked on top of one another, and these are all the resources from the presenter, including the slide deck for this session. So to enable us to keep up with the questions, we ask you that you please only use the Q&A icon to share your questions with the speakers, and feel free to vote for questions. Again, it's the third icon from the top with the Q&A on it on the vertical bar. If at any time during the session you need to step away, take a break, debrief, or decompress, please feel free to do so. Our wellness room is open and ready for you. You may enter the wellness room by clicking on the wellness room button on the top left side of the event navigation bar, and a member of our team will meet you there. And so now I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the team that's presenting. I'm going to start with Dana Basio. She is a certified school psychologist in the state of Connecticut and has served as a regional trauma coordinator for cooperative educational services since 2022. An advocate for suicide prevention, Dana is a member of the Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board and is invested in integrating school climate practices with trauma informed care in order to support mental wellness in students, educators, and families. Jennifer Harris holds active certification in both school psychology and intermediate in administration and supervision. Jennifer has spent 16 years as a school psychologist in Connecticut before transitioning to her current position of regional trauma coordinator at Ed Advance, a regional education service center in Connecticut. Diana Perry holds a doctorate in clinical psychology and is a licensed professional counselor. She is the regional trauma coordinator for the North Central region of Connecticut. And Tiana Hill is a licensed master social worker and the regional trauma coordinator for LEARN Regional Educational Service Center. She has written several publications on topics addressing systems change and evidence based practices and has extensive knowledge of trauma informed care, mental health, juvenile justice, and adolescent development. So I'm going to turn it over to the dream team, and you guys are in for a treat.
Oh, thank you so much for that introduction, Lisa. I hope everybody can hear me okay. And thank you all for being here this morning as we reflect on empowering and engaging youth in trauma informed conversations. My colleagues and I are really excited to share highlights from the focus groups that we implemented in Connecticut and hope you'll find some inspiration in our methodology and from the insights that students shared. The conversations we had with youth from all walks of life greatly informed the development of UPLIFT, a trauma-informed care training program for schools across Connecticut that we mapped out and developed last academic year. The guiding questions that you're seeing in front of you are the ones that have and continue to help us refine and strengthen UPLIFT. We all agree that youth voice is essential. How well do we truly integrate this belief into practice? By centering youth voices and experiences, we can create better, more effective systems. What are effective ways to engage them in the development and rollout of programs designed specifically with them in mind? Too often, students are affected by adult-driven strategies and initiatives without their input. Policies and decisions are frequently made for youth and families rather than with them. While adult-centric leadership can be logical, it often excludes student contributions to decisions that directly impact their daily experiences. Running youth groups may seem daunting at first, but it's manageable with the right approach. And we hope that this workshop will encourage you to move away from a top-down approach to program development and instead prioritize a process that empowers and amplifies student voice. In practice, what this means is that if we want our students to feel supported, we need to push through barriers so that they can feel safe, connected, and heard by the adults around them. We have a couple of objectives for today's workshop, and they're nearly identical to those that we had when we first set out to speak with youth. We're going to explore traditional hierarchies that might be permeating your settings and outline the critical role that students can play when you're developing school-based programming and interventions. We will share a bit of the trauma-informed theory as to why student voice is critical, and then review emergent themes and insights gained by engaging in trauma-informed conversations with students here in Connecticut. These talks informed our planning and implementation of UPLIFT, and with these objectives in mind today, we hope you'll be inspired to address barriers to this type of conversation and create ways to engage youth in developing school-based or trauma-informed programming. Before we begin, I just want to offer a little context about Connecticut and the regional trauma coordinator role. In Connecticut, we have what are called regional educational service centers that are available to support districts with specialized programs, consultation, or professional development. The map you're looking at kind of breaks down the catchment areas for each of the 6 RESCs, and many states have RESCs. Here in Connecticut, oftentimes ours work on projects just within their catchment area, sort of in a siloed way. But recently, we were given an opportunity to collaborate and develop a statewide training and consultation approach around trauma-informed care for the state. So in July 2022, new legislation tasked all the RESCs with developing a regional trauma coordinator position. These RTCs, as we call ourselves, were tasked with collaborating to develop a trauma-informed care training program to be provided at no cost to all schools throughout the state. We'd already, as a state, kind of taken legislative strides to address children's mental health and trauma exposure, large part having to do with the huge impact that the Sandy Hook tragedy had, and how it shone a light on the impacts of community trauma. This act concerning children's mental health was a major step forward because it acknowledged that we have to identify treatments for kids, but we also had to ensure that school staff were aware of how trauma exposure and toxic stress might be informing some of the behaviors and issues that students are bringing with them to school. And we're here because of that act. During the first year of this legislation, through conversations with local leaders, school mental health advocates, we went about developing a vision, which you can see in front of you. Essentially, we hope that our state will, all systems will want to infuse trauma-informed care practices because they notice how it can positively impact the climate for everybody, not just students. And we decided on the name UPLIFT, which isn't an acronym, it's more of a motto. It's a program that's meant to lift up everyone, families, administrators, staff, because trauma-informed systems can't just focus on kids. In order to ensure that we maintained a commitment to uplifting everybody, it was critical to make sure that youth were a part of the development process and that we heard their perspectives as we began this journey. What we learned from these students informed our approach to supporting the training and consultation needs of our educators, who are really just trying to address the mental health needs and disparities that students and families face, which we all know have become more visible since the COVID-19 pandemic began. Many of the suggestions and ideas that youth offered inform the UPLIFT training curriculum that we developed. And as you can see, there are 10 available modules within this program. Facilitating youth groups and listening to youth from the very beginning not only offered them an opportunity to be heard and feel empowered, but it assisted us in learning and targeting exactly how we wanted to go about building each of the UPLIFT training modules that you're looking at. As you can see, we offer a foundational module, one focused specifically on staff and system well-being, one that outlines trauma-informed care leadership best practices and strategies, as well as a 6-part series that delves deeply into each of SAMHSA's 6 core principles of trauma-informed care. When we think about the mental health of adults and children, we know it's been exacerbated on many levels, especially since the pandemic. The data you're looking at are data that we shared with youth at the beginning of each focus group. This is kind of what couched the conversation. We provided them a little bit of information and then talked. These stats clearly show that young people and adults are struggling. When we shared this with them, they weren't as surprised as you might think. Be it their own lived experiences, those of their friends, they seem to just empathize with the gravity of struggles that their peers and they endure. We shared with them that adults, that nationally, 63% or 2 in 3 kids have experienced at least one trauma or adverse experiences. We also shared that 42% of high school students and 57% of teen girls said they felt persistently sad or hopeless, according to a US CDC report. That's the highest rate in 10 years. We also shared that 1 out of 5 adolescents had a diagnosis of major depressive disorder in that year, and according to a 2023 study, fewer than half of those who needed treatment were getting it. Lastly, we talked a bit about the suicide rates and how they're a rising concern. For instance, we shared that in 2021, 10% of high school students attempted suicide, and 1 out of 5 seriously considered doing so. In terms of disparities in this area, among LGBTQIA+ students, 69% felt persistently sad or hopeless, and nearly 1 out of 2 seriously considered attempting suicide. We shared this, as well as some basic info about trauma-informed care at the beginning of each focus group, and answered questions that they had and listened to the impressions that these startling data had on them. Our participants recognize the invisible struggle that many students are experiencing at present, and we have a short video clip that articulates the invisibility of these struggles.
That there are definitely a lot of kids who are really struggling with it, and that 100% sometimes it is so hard to tell. Seriously, some kids can be bearing something and you would have no idea. But yeah, a lot of people really need it in this work.
Thank you. I think he does a really great job of just plainly stating how alone youth can feel, and his words make it clear how important it is to empower youth to speak out and how critical it is that schools and communities have the training and support they need to feel confident in meeting the needs of youth. We also talk with kids about some of the potential impacts of untreated trauma exposure or toxic stress. And there are a number of troubling outcomes that can result when kids and teens who have been exposed to trauma or a lot of stress aren't properly identified and supported. More often than not, many of those students are systematically shut out of opportunities to voice their opinions and concerns. Our youth had a lot to say about that. When youth voice is asked for, typically the voices that are solicited are those of students who are successful across the board, while those at the margins aren't actively sought out to contribute. In summary, research continues to show that there are many ways that trauma has the potential to impact youth. It's been clearly documented that trauma can result in a variety of long-term health problems and decreased life expectancy. Trauma is pervasive, creating developmental roadblocks, barriers to learning, and a higher likelihood of mental health issues down the road. We're going to talk a little bit more now about what our students thought about all of this information. But before we do, we also wanted to highlight for them the implications of exclusionary discipline. Students who potentially already have less established relationships with adults are further typically excluded from school when we think of exclusionary practices. This increases the chances that they're going to drop out, or maybe face unemployment in the future, or be involved with the juvenile justice system. This requires us to take a hard look at how implicit bias or our own school systems might over-rely on practices that perpetuate inequities that are harmful to marginalized groups who are already at greater risk for the long-term effects. I'm going to pass it over to Tiana so she can continue to share with you a little bit more about how we went about talking with youth.
Thank you, Diana. So I'm going to share a little bit about what some of the things are that we did in order to engage some of our young people in this process. So Diana mentioned, she talked a little bit about what our role is with the UPLIFT program and how we kind of developed it. But one of the major components that we utilized was really youth voice. And so we knew that it was important for us to really think about the young people that we were planning to serve. So it's one thing to create a program where we're saying we want to target or address youth trauma and youth mental health and not include the youth. And so what we did was we decided that we wanted to host some focus groups to really kind of engage them in this process and really hear what they were thinking. What did they want to know? What, did they have to share that would be impactful for the work that we were trying to embark on? So what we did last year, we spent a little time with about over 100 youth, just talking to them about trauma, talking to them about trauma-informed care. We also hosted a focus group, really looking at what are the 6 guiding principles and how is it impacting you in your school building. And so I want to share some of the things that they talked about. And so I'm gonna go into a little bit more detail about how that went about. And so, one of the first things we did when we met with them is we talked about trauma, right? And so we've been hearing trauma, throughout the country lately. There's been a lot of talk around it. And I think since the pandemic has happened, a lot of folks have really heightened their focus on it. And so we wanted to hear from the kids and say, hey, what does trauma mean to you? What does it look like to you? And this is just kind of a word cloud of some of the things that stood out for them. They shared that, it was a negative experience, right? And so some of them talked about it being distressing, that it was something that impacted your mental, your emotional. So they had a pretty clear picture of what trauma was. And so it was really interesting to hear their perspective of how trauma looked to them and what it felt like and what they considered it to be. And so these were just some of the things that they shared. And I'm pretty sure, if you're working in a school system or you're working in any type of public system, some of the things might not be new to you. But it was just great to kind of hear from the students how they define trauma. And so these were just some of the things that they shared. So how did we solicit youth voice, right? And so that's usually the question that we hear often. People are like, well, how do you get youth involved? How do you keep them engaged in this process? And so what we did was we started to, really think about what our outreach would look like. And so one of the first things we did, it was really word of mouth. So we did a lot of trainings on the UPLIFT program with a lot of adults. And, we basically informed them about the work that we were doing. So we took multiple avenues when it came to finding youth groups and individuals who wanted to engage in this conversation about trauma-informed care, because we knew that the more that we tried to connect, the better chance that we had. So again, we used word of mouth, we did social media, and how we did this, we also created a flyer. I used my limited design skill to go onto a platform to create a flyer that really, I wanted it to speak to you. So the first thing we did is we told them what it was, like why we were doing it. We also incentivized it. So we wanted to make sure that, you felt like they were going to get something out of it as well, by sharing their experiences. So we did provide some incentive. So I know that, oftentimes, depending on if you're working in a nonprofit organization or if you're working in the school system, it may be difficult to provide incentives, but it is a helpful way to kind of gauge youth in that process. So we did offer some gift cards to students to participate, pending that they did like a pre and post test. And so we also use eBlast to solicit this flyer. We use a lot of listservs. We also reached out to focus, youth-focused organizations that really work with youth. So that was an easier way to get youth connected. We also use, a lot of the community resources that we have. So there's a lot of listservs that go out where we kind of, receive information about things that are happening in the community. And so that was a really unique way to also reach out to youth. And really thinking about, some of the schools that we worked in. So a lot of us work in several schools. So it was easier to solicit youth voice that way. So we kind of gathered students that we had relationships with, and we were able to do that also by soliciting youth voice and getting them involved in that process as well. And so, again, there's many ways that you can capitalize off this in terms of trying to get youth involved. You can also use texting. That's something that you all do in terms of how you might engage some of your students. I know there's a lot of different platforms and apps that some schools use to reach out to their students as well. So that's another way to, inform them about the process. I know we had some students that might have announced it through school announcements that do like the announcements in the morning to invite people to come out and join the youth focus groups as well. So there was a number of ways that we went about making sure that we were able to get students involved. And you can go to the next slide. We also collected demographics, and some of those demographics included, collecting their race. We also wanted to know their gender. We also looked at the town that they lived in, because what we found out was that a lot of kids were living in towns that they didn't necessarily go to school in. So it was easier for us to collect the town just to kind of capture the different regions that each of the students were living in. And Diana mentioned earlier that we all work in different regions, so it was a way for us to kind of capture the entire state. As I mentioned earlier, we had over 100 youth that were involved in this process. So about 64 of the students agreed to kind of share their demographics. We were also able to capture a number of youth voice from different settings. So not only the school, but we also tapped into, youth that had DCF involvement, as well as youth that were in juvenile detention centers, so had some type of juvenile justice involvement as well, because we wanted to make sure that we were also capturing unique number of voices. And so really making sure that we were also capturing the demographics of each of the regions that we were serving. And we did a pretty good job of, really getting different voices at the table. So we're really proud about that. And I want to hear from you all. So I want to do a quick poll. So I think Diana's going to launch the poll for us that really kind of ask the question about, how often, do you all engage in the development or implementation of new practices or policies? So we really want to hear from you all and how you all are engaging your youth. So I believe the poll has been launched.
Deanna, just let me know how long you'd like to keep the poll open, and I can close it up whenever you feel it's been enough.
Can you see as folks are taking the poll? Can you see it? Like who's voting? If enough folks have voted?
Absolutely. Votes are rolling in, and yeah.
All right. So you can share, because I believe you can share if people are voting as well. So if you want to do that, it's fine too.
Right now, this is what's showing. I can see a number of votes. We've got about 70 in there already. I'm not sure why it's not showing on screen, but sorry about that.
Yeah, I think you may have to end it to show it. All right, I see some votes. So it looks like we have a few folks that said, so most folks said sometimes, so that's good. We got a couple rarely, about 31% said rarely, and then we have about 11% that said never, and then some is often, with a few being always. So yeah, so based on the poll, it's clear that we can see that sometimes, we don't often have the opportunities to engage youth in this process. We recognize that there could be many barriers or obstacles that can arise. when we think about trying to engage our students. And I think, one of the common needs is that we have to pay attention, to the context and power, right? And so how do we, make sure that we are seeking youth voice? And so I think a lot of it has to do with leadership. So making sure that leadership, take initiative, rather than uh, not supporting youth in their endeavors. So it's important that we include them. We heard that very often during our youth focus groups, that kids wanted to be included in the process. They wanted to know what was happening when staff was surveying them. So they never really got information about what happened next. So they definitely want to be involved. So I would encourage each and every one of you to think about how you can involve your students in the process, or any young folk that you're working with in developing anything that is going to be focused towards youth. And then, really thinking about some scheduling issues. So we know that, that can be a barrier as well. We know it can be difficult to schedule these things, especially when you're, trying to get through curriculum. If you're in a school setting, it may be difficult to gather some of those youth voice, but really thinking about how to carve out time to really support youth and bringing their ideas to the table. So another part that we want to talk about is, really thinking about the importance of youth voice. One of the first things that we notice is that, they offer a unique perspective, right? I know we're all the adults, and sometimes, we don't know everything, right? And it's always good to really solicit information from young people, especially when we're creating things that are going to impact them. And youth are the experts in their own experiences. They can provide valuable insights about what strategies, interventions are most effective for their well-being. We also know that they can offer a diverse perspective for us that may not have even, we might not have even considered it, which is going to lead to a more holistic and effective strategy. And then thinking about the personal relevance, youth are more likely to engage with, the staff that want to provide benefits for them. So they're willing to help sometimes. A lot of them are really good at graphics. So I know I talked about the flyer earlier, right? So sometimes get youth on board to, if you know you want to do something that is youth focused, think about getting youth to design those flyers to help you. I use a platform like Canva to design it. So Canva is a easy way to, plug in information that they already have designed set for you. So if you're limited like me, you can go on Canva and they'll create, help you create those flyers. But again, tap into your network, your student network. A lot of them are really good at using graphics, and they post on social media, so they're really familiar with that type of stuff. And then thinking about that empowerment and ownership piece. So, one of the 6 guiding principles of a trauma-informed care approach talks a lot about empowerment, voice, and choice. So really allowing them to feel empowered and to have ownership. And so, involving them in that decision-making process is going to empower them to take an active role in how they shape their experience. And it's going to lead to a greater sense of, ownership and investment in their own well-being. And then the last piece is that, you really want to build trust and connection. So really think about how you collaborate with the youth to develop these strategies and interventions. I think it builds trust. It's also going to strengthen your relationship, which is something that we talk a lot about in trauma-informed care, is this idea of building relationships and, giving students an opportunity to feel safe. And so, really being supportive, when we have, that supportive environment, it really creates that healing relationship that a lot of students are seeking when they have experienced some type of traumatic experience. And so I want you all to think about, 2 questions. So, are there ways that all students, and not just those that are in a leadership role, can be included in your decision-making process? So, oftentimes we hear about the kids that might be involved in sports, or maybe the kids that, are in student government. But, what about the kids that we don't hear from? And so those are the kids that we typically try to tap into. We really want to hear from those kids that might not necessarily be involved in the after-school activities, but really making sure that we're considering all of the students in the building. And then another question I would love for you all to think about is, what strategies do you think could support students in sharing their experience and ideas? So when you're thinking about, some of the things that you want to do, whether you work in a youth serving organization, or you work in a school, or whatever you do and you work with youth in some capacity, think about what are the strategies that you think would support them. How do you get them involved? What are some things that you can do to involve them in some of these processes and some of these changes that we're trying to advocate for youth mental health and trauma. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about the structure that we took and how we did that. So, really our process for conducting these focus group really was all about the structure. And so what did that look like? So, again, we created a presentation for them. And so the structure really included talking about trauma, telling them what trauma-informed care was. We talked a little bit about what our role was, why we were collecting this information. So it's always important, too, to tell them why you're collecting the information. What are you going to do with the information that you're collecting? So really thinking about the structure of how you're going to present. And then making sure that you have a diversified number of participants. So not just really focusing on a specific group of people, but making sure that we're including all of the voices and really thinking about what the demographic of our population looks like. So if you work in a school setting, what does that demographic look like? And is your group representative of that demographic? Also having an agenda. So again, telling them what the plan is. Do they know what we're going to talk about? What are the expectations? Providing, again, some context about why you're doing the work, even doing an icebreaker. Because a lot of times we'll have students that come in and they might not feel comfortable sharing. So we always try to do something to kind of liven the conversation or to get them in the zone, to get them comfortable. You could even do something like a mindfulness activity, which is something that we often do as well. Even thinking about some norms, like what are going to be your shared upon agreements if you want to do a focus group? Like what are some of the things that you all are going to agree to do? So, we have a set of agreements that we created, and then we'll often seek their input about, what do those agreements look like for you? How do you, give your input? So what do you want to see happen in this group? What do you want to see the outcome? And then we talk a little bit about, any questions that we have for discussion. So we allow them to ask questions if they have questions about the topic that we're talking about and, how we're going to move this work forward. And then, we do a post test. So because we want to make sure that what we're doing is effective, right? And so we did a pre and post test. So we actually did a pre-test to kind of see where their knowledge was around trauma and then, what they knew about trauma-informed care. And then we kind of followed up and did a post test to really get some feedback about what they thought about the focus group and was it helpful for them. And what I'm going to share now is a quick video that we captured. So around this time when we did this video, it was really, we had interviewed a little over 50 kids, but since then it's been over 100 kids. But I want to just share some of the things that they said. And so what we tried to do was capture this video. And Jen, you can go ahead and play the video. And it'll give you all a second to kind of read the paragraph. It just said,
for help, and they tell me to ask.
All right, yeah, you can go ahead and play it.
Extension for help, and they tell me to ask another. I give up and don't ask for help.
In my school, if you do something disrespectful, they kick you out and put you in the quiet room.
There should be peer support programs. Kids feel comfortable with other kids.
It's all rushed now, pushing through curriculum.
I take a survey to see if I needed help, and I didn't make the cut.
I think mental health should be a discussion that is talked about throughout the whole school, not just limited to health class.
I don't think anyone can help me feel safe.
Instead of looking at why I left and seeing that I was emotionally not okay, the teacher only saw that I walked out of class without permission.
Any reaction to this video? If you have any reactions, I would love to hear from you all. If you could drop them in the chat, let us know, what were your reactions? Were you surprised by anything you heard? Anything surprised you? Anything that stood out for you all? We'd love to hear from you all. So I hear somebody said heartbreak, not surprising at all. Disappointment, disheartened as a former teacher. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. We don't ask the important questions. Not surprised. I like that they were asking for peer-to-peer. Awesome. These kids know they need help and can't get it. They feel unheard. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. I'm actually going to turn it over to Dana, and she's actually going to share some videos from some of the focus groups that we did. She's going to share some of the themes that arose from those conversations that we had. And then we also have some clips of students actually sharing their own school experiences. So I'm going to turn it over to Dana, and she's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks so much, Tiana. Hi, everyone. I think one of the things I also want to highlight is that our students were very brave, and a number of them made statements like, you know, no one's ever asked us these questions before. No one's ever heard or listened to us. So, you know, I think it's remarkable that they have that awareness and willingness when given the opportunity to talk to do so. So I think that's incredibly important. Our focus groups really were structured around the 6 principles of trauma-informed care. So safety, trust and transparency, collaboration and mutuality. And I always want to highlight when working with educators, when working with students, when you hear those terms or those phrases, they don't immediately bring you to think about trauma. Really, they're about humanity. They're about school climate. These are universalities that are not specific to trauma. So we structured our conversation around that. And I think when we think about safety in schools, traditional thinking is really focused on physical safety in schools. And again, that's essential given so many of the events of the last 3 decades, you know, from September 11th to, again, Columbine to Sandy Hook to the pandemic, which obviously resulted in a lot of physical safety measures being put in place, and so many other events that have led to overhauling our physical safety measures in schools. We know that physical safety is intended to, again, promote your sense of physical integrity and safety amongst folks. We practice fire drills. We practice lockdown drills. We do all of those things, but we don't spend as much time thinking on psychological safety. And psychological safety is being, you know, able and comfortable being your full self in the space, regardless of who's in your proximity. And it refers to creating conditions that ensure we feel emotionally safe. So let's hear what some of our students had to say about safety and their experience in their schools.
When you all think about this idea of safety,
I say that's the idea of kind of like being in a secure place where like you feel physically safe, but like also like your feelings aren't being hurt, like your character. That's not really talk about bullying like in the classroom setting. I feel like we haven't talked about it in high school. The last time we really discussed it back in like 8th grade or just like middle school at some point.
but you definitely see it in high school, right?
I think like the way bullying has worked now has shifted from like your like 80s movie push the kid into the locker to more like subtle forms, like more like social exclusion and like posting things, whispering to someone behind their back. So it's harder to like really intervene, but you can tell that something's off.
You find that the adults are responsive if you do report
I
it?
think it depends on what it is.
Okay.
Sometimes it can just be like a conversation with the person. I know NICE has had meetings in the words.
Do you think all kids feel safe in school?
I've seen like there's been pretty bad bullying that I've seen that community is a lot more a lot less people feel like
Safe.
Like they belong.
And I think one thing I want to clarify about this particular group that graciously allowed us to film them is that they're in a unique position that they attend a regional center for the arts. So they are in their home school for, let's say, the first 4 hours of the day, and then they go to whether they're art, music, film for the second half of the day. And the majority of them, you're going to notice that they're referencing that when they are in the smaller group, they have more practices in place that promote safety, whereas when they're in their high schools where there might be 3,000 students, it's a lot more challenging to maintain that feeling. So again, when we look at the next slide, you're going to see some of the themes that emerged when we looked at our youth focus groups over 100 participants. And again, there's a lot of overlap there. Psychological safety in the schools, it's really the belief that you're not going to be humiliated or mocked for the ideas you offer, for asking questions, for making mistakes. Our students were, I think, more aware of psychological safety than sometimes the adults are. And again, there were some mixed feelings about SRO and security presence in the buildings. And some folks felt it helped them feel safer. And for other kiddos, that was less the sense. It felt more threatening. And ultimately, there's a difference between being safe physically and feeling safe. Next slide, Jen. Thank you. Okay, so SAMHSA defines trust and transparency in an organization as actions and decisions are conducted with transparency to build and maintain trust with students, families, staff, and all others involved in the school. And this honesty is going to lead to better relationships. If those trusting relationships don't exist, the likelihood of folks seeking support is lessened. And I think referring back to one of the questions in the chat, how much information did we provide to students ahead of time when we were soliciting participants? Again, if we want to walk the walk and talk the talk, we have to give them that information. We have to be transparent about what we're looking for. That was a wonderful question. But let's hear from our students about their relationships with adults in schools.
When it comes to just like working with students in general, like there who are really, really good with that and who really like are able to connect with their students on a deeper level. But there are some who are literally just like rock hard and who have like teachers should care about their students, like not only like want them to do well, but also want them to feel like appreciated and heard.
So many more students, it's harder to really build a personal relationship with a teacher, especially if you have them like maybe once your whole high school career and the amount of time you spend with them. Like even my homeroom teacher, I feel like usually that's what the school is, that's your home base, but I'm with him 5 minutes twice a week. So I feel like that's not enough to really build a connection.
Consistency in talking. They push curriculum and stuff. We fall behind anyways. Like, why not just like take maybe like half an hour to an hour just talking and just opening up. I feel like that would help a lot, especially if someone's really struggling and you can like see it. You could be like, hey, do you want to just like calm down and like talk about it?
I apologize for my pedestrian editing skills, so if it's a little choppy, but I do want to clarify the goal is not to critique teachers, particularly high school teachers, which all of our participants were from high school. They have multiple classes, they have limited time and a lot of content to get through, but what we're hearing loud and clear from students is they want to know their teachers. They want their teachers to know them. And the structure of the schedule really limits the time we have to just talk and feel valued as a whole person, not just an academic student. And this is even more challenging for our kids who have experienced trauma because, trust may not come as naturally to them, but taking the time is essential. Let's look at sort of the themes that emerged when we looked at the larger group. There's certainly some alignment with what we were hearing from those three kids, particularly with regard to the focus on academics in high schools. But we might argue that learning really hinges on students feeling safe and connected in their school environments. We came out of the pandemic and we were immediately talking about how are we going to fill in the learning gaps without acknowledging that psychological safety and physical safety were primary needs at that point. And thinking back to whether or not there are conversations about mental health in schools, in those places where it's not normalized, the kids that are struggling the most, like Aiden had said earlier on, might not be able to advocate for themselves and seek support. On a positive note, the great majority of the kids that we spoke with were able to identify at least one trusted adult they could connect to in school if they needed support. Okay, so we saw that one of our students in those quotes where the kids had the audio recording, those were direct quotes from our students. So peer support, and I know someone had said that they love that's included, but peer support is a key vehicle for establishing safety, hope, building community, enhancing collaboration. So we asked our students to reflect on opportunities for peer support and what they might find helpful if it didn't exist.
You all do have at your school is it something that you're interested in? And if it's not, what type of peer support programs would you all be interested in? What would that look like for you if it's not already offered at your school?
It's something that just does things throughout the school more consistently. Because I feel like if there are groups like these, they do it maybe like the beginning of the year for the student orientation and maybe end of the year, like finals. Don't stress out, guys. That's that. But they don't do things as consistently throughout the year. Because I feel like if we just focus on the beginning and end of the year, it's not going to help out the majority of schooling. Because really, school gets more stressful. Like for me, in the middle of it, uh, when things are like super busy with activities and classes getting more difficult.
So again, our students really recognize that peer support should be highlighted as an option, and there are some barriers. And on the next slide, some of our students acknowledge that being involved in a peer support group from a confidentiality or a privacy standpoint might be a little bit challenging. But what we're hearing, I think, loud and clear is that while some peer support might be offered, it's really adult-led. Times and efforts are chosen by adults when they might need the support on a more ongoing basis, and when the year starts to build up with those pressures. But this might be a perfect opportunity for students to feel empowered to develop programs and supports that work for them. Next slide. So now we're talking about mutuality, collaboration. They're really synonymous with partnering and leveling of power differences between staff, students, administrators, and families. It highlights the need for us to meaningfully share power, decision-making, and select the topics that are most important and beneficial to the folks we're trying to serve and treat. So as a continuation of our prior conversation, we asked our students to consider what opportunities do they have to speak about mental health in school.
Well, do you have clubs that talk about that? How you're feeling? I know you talked a little bit about, the things that you've gone through. Have you had the opportunity to talk about those things outside of the classroom or within your school?
I feel like it really depends on the setting and also like who you're talking to. Like I know I said I would go to my counselor if something happened, but my teacher would see me feeling down and then he would be like, hey, I made a call to Miss Toth. You can go down and go see her if you feel like it. And usually I would go because she's kind of the safe place for me.
More consistency from teachers as far as like being supportive, like not just in the half hour that we're talking about it, but when it actually happens.
So I think we got the sense from most of our students that when there are conversations about mental health, they're more of a one and done as opposed to something that's meaningfully integrated in across the school day, across all classes. And our students again and again and again highlighted that discussions about health, well-being, and safety should be part of regular conversations with adults. So I think, and I think it was Zoe that was saying over and over again, just talk to us. Just talk to us. So at any rate, what a great group. And I'm getting ready to hand it over to Jen for the end of our presentation. Except I have one more. I forgot. So again, this was a survey that was posted to our students about whether or not their schools have specific programs or classes where they talk about mental health. I'm glad that over half do, and a little disheartened that there's such a large proportion of students that don't know. So that speaks volumes because the first step towards change is awareness, as Nathaniel Brandon said. So if it can feel stigmatizing to talk about mental health, and maybe educators don't necessarily feel like they have the tools, or they're not therapists or confident in their ability to do so. The conversations are wanted by adults, and having that opportunity to share your story can make you feel less alone and normalize the experiences that we all have. And now I will turn it over to Jen.
Thank you, Dana. So as we're coming into our last couple of those 6 key principles that we talked about, we looked at empowerment, voice, and choice, which really is emphasized as the importance of recognizing individual strengths and experiences and building on them. And it brings up the question of what are the avenues available for students to express their voice, and are we empowering students in meaningful ways to have an impact on their environments? So we're going to hear from our students again.
Do you guys do surveys at all? Do they give you guys surveys?
Yeah. My school, like, they use surveys, but they're very generic, and it's like on a scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable do you feel in your school? Like 1 being not comfortable, 5 being comfortable. But with just putting like a bunch of numbers, ranging from whatever, I feel like it's not getting specific enough, especially like some kids don't care and they'll just like click whatever, but they don't have any like open-ended prompts. Even with these surveys, I feel like, because I know a lot of people are just like, I don't feel comfortable in this school, and they give their honest feedback, but I haven't seen like any major improvements or changes happen.
Like they give us the surveys, but
they don't do anything.
Nothing.
Okay.
Do they share the information back with you?
No.
It helps if I unmute myself when I go back to speaking. You can see that the themes that emerged across all of the students we worked with were similar to what was expressed in the video, using those occasional general surveys that may not be specific enough or offer opportunities for open-ended responses, and also that there's limited visible change as a result of the surveys. And our youth also spoke about the fact that it can be hard to speak up even when in smaller groups, and that having an anonymous opportunity to speak up can really be helpful. Another of the guiding principles of trauma-informed systems is addressing cultural, historical, and gender issues, and really actively working to move past cultural stereotypes and biases, offering gender-responsive services, and practicing culturally responsive pedagogy. So it was pretty eye-opening to hear from youth about their perceptions of how this is done in their schools.
Important, and people are upheld to that.
I feel like people just do it because it's supposed to be done, but I don't know if people are actually having that with a change in mind. I know during Black History Month, they'll say, like on the announcements, they'll have something about someone, about a famous person. Or during Women's History Month, they've done that too, and during Pride Month for the 10 days that we're in school.
Do you feel it gets more information sharing than discussion or reflection?
Like kind of just there, to be honest. And not everyone watches the announcements because not everyone's in their advanced class in the mornings.
I think, integrating more like diversity education. Like one semester I took an English class that was really focused on reading texts from like people of all sorts of backgrounds. And I found it really like engaging, and we had a lot of meaningful discussions as a class about like how these circumstances might have shaped people and how we can relate to it even if someone had a completely different background than us. So I think more education with that, especially like in the social studies classes, would be beneficial.
Yeah.
So the responses here really highlight the importance of integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion in a meaningful and thoughtful way so that it's not perceived as checking a box or as something that's kind of just there to say that it's done. As we saw in the video, one of the students spoke about how integrating more diversity education into the curriculum in a natural way led to meaningful conversations and understanding of how you can relate to other cultural experiences. In our focus groups, we also looked at the principle of cultural, historical, and gender factors through the lens of discipline. And themes that emerged centered a lot around removal from class and punitive responses, though we did speak with students from a district that had some clearly defined processes that included some restorative practices built in. Overwhelmingly, our students recognized the need for a holistic view of behavior to get the full picture of not just the what, but also the why. And you can also see that a quarter of our respondents did not feel that students were treated equally in their schools. We also asked about their perceptions of their school's level of commitment to addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and about 43% of responses indicated it's something that's talked about frequently, and they're either starting to take action or have not really seen any action. 38% felt that it was something around which a lot of work is being done in their systems, and 17% weren't sure, which kind of, I think, means that if it is being talked about, it's likely not at such a level that it's known about district-wide. So demonstrating this commitment to addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion and implementing practices that recognize cultural, historical, and gender issues in meaningful ways is crucial to ensuring that all students feel valued, respected, and supported, which is going to create that environment where they can heal and thrive. And our conversations with kids really highlight the fact that although this work is being done to some degree in many places, there is a lot of room for growth. So as we are coming into the very end of our session together here, to sort of bring this all together, when we're empowering students to share their voice, there are some things we can keep in mind. Many students lack the confidence or skills to express themselves meaningfully. So teaching effective expression does require time and commitment, but it is an important factor in ensuring that all of our students' voices are heard. Regularly implementing strategies like these can help students practice and develop their voices. And we do have a couple of don'ts there. I'm sure we could all think of more, but a couple that we really wanted to highlight here are making sure that we're not seeking student input just to check a box. Kids are perceptive, and they're going to realize that their voice is not being considered. Dismissing or ignoring their input is going to undermine trust and keep kids from participating meaningfully in the future. One of the students pretty clearly said in the video that some of those surveys, people respond, they just don't care and just put whatever, because they're not seeing that meaningful change coming as a result of anything that's happening with the surveys. And as we reflect on the information shared by students and the importance of empowering student voices, we're left with questions that we can use to guide our practice moving forward. We should consider whether our existing structures and practices support ongoing reflection, conversation, and adaptation. Are students given regular opportunities to reflect on their experiences and express their thoughts? Do we have mechanisms in place to facilitate open conversations about their needs and experiences? Are we willing to adapt our approaches based on their feedback? These are crucial questions to ask as we're working to create environments where students feel empowered to use their voice confidently and effectively. It's also important to consider the variety of methods and techniques we use to solicit student voice. Are we incorporating diverse approaches such as surveys, focus groups, one-on-one conversations, and creative expression? Are the methods that we're using accessible to all students, including those with diverse needs and backgrounds? Really utilizing a range of techniques ensures that we're capturing the voices of all students and creates a more inclusive and comprehensive understanding of their experiences and needs. It's also important to look at the composition of formal student groups. Do these groups represent the diversity of the student body? Are marginalized voices and perspectives included and valued? Ensuring equitable representation in these groups is essential for creating a school culture where all students feel seen, heard, and supported. It's not just about having seats at the table, but also ensuring that those seats carry meaningful influence and decision-making power. We also need to consider how feedback is shared within our school community. I think that's one that's often missed. We collect information, we don't always disseminate that information back out. So is feedback shared in a timely and constructive manner? Meaningful and actionable feedback loops are important for building trust and ensuring that student voices are heard and that they feel that they are having a tangible impact on school practices and policies. And as we wrap up our time together, we have some key takeaways that we want to highlight from today. There is a contrast between top-down program development, which often sidelines student voices, and the empowering nature of trauma-informed care, which prioritizes and amplifies student voices. To truly support students, we need to ensure that they feel safe, connected, and heard by the adults in their lives. This requires not just listening, but actively encouraging and valuing their input. All stakeholders, whether educators, administrators, or community members, play a vital role in nurturing the confidence and skills necessary for students to share their ideas and suggestions. Collaborative learning experiences are instrumental in providing students with the time and practice needed to find and utilize their voices effectively. Our students have important things to share, and we have much to learn from them. I want to thank all of you for your time today. I know there were some questions in the Q&A, but I think they've all been answered. Nope, we have a couple of unanswered ones.
Yeah, and due to time, Jennifer, we have to close it out. We just appreciate everything shared today. We just appreciate everyone that has joined us. And I just want to share our upcoming session for everyone. So Vanessa Williams will illuminate the evolving strategies, societal shifts, and personal growth that have shaped the journey through crisis services. This poignant presentation will not only unravel the speaker's unique journey, but also resonate as a testament to the collective struggles and victories faced by individuals navigating mental health challenges. So this is our upcoming keynote. Everyone, if you have an opportunity, check it out at 12:30. We just appreciate all the nuggets of wisdom shared today. It was such an engaging presentation. Tiana, she shared the contact information in the chat, and we just appreciate your time. Such a beautiful opportunity just to continue to learn together. So we thank you all, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you, everyone.